In 1962, a young accounting student named Phil Knight was on a life-changing trip when he walked into a meeting with a Japanese shoe company and boldly presented himself as the head of a thriving U.S. distributor that did not exist. Now, that single, unreal moment of invention, it wasn't just a lie. It was the birth of a philosophy that would somehow turn a few $100s and a car trunk of shoes into a global symbol of aspiration. Today, we're decoding that very philosophy, the Phil Knight rule. Let's dig into the principles that turned a $500 bluff into an empire that just keeps running.
So our story kicks off not in some fancy boardroom, not with a huge investment, but with a single incredibly high-stakes bluff. It's a moment that really has the entire DNA of what Nike would eventually become. It's that split second of creation, where belief just had to be more real, more tangible, and way more powerful than actual reality. This is where it all began.
I mean, can you even imagine the sheer audacity of this? This wasn't just, stretching the truth a little. He was literally speaking a company into existence. Knight was just a recent grad from Stanford with a business paper about importing Japanese running shoes, not some industry mogul. But he got it. He knew, in that room, that to get what he wanted, he had to be the person he saw in his head, even if that person was a total fabrication at the time. It was this necessary act of self-delusion where the vision for the future had to completely stand in for the fact that there was no present.
And the company he was supposedly representing? Blue Ribbon Sports. Sounds solid, right? Respectable. The only tiny problem was, it didn't exist until the words literally left his mouth. He made it up, right there, in the meeting. And that little detail shows you everything about his future success. The idea itself, the brand, the story, that was the real product. The shoes? They'd come later. First, you had to build the thing people could believe in.
So what was backing this grand vision for Blue Ribbon Sports, this thriving U.S. distributor? $500. That's it. That was every penny he had to his name, and he had to borrow it from his dad. I mean, the contrast is almost ridiculous, right? On one hand, you've got this huge, confident vision he just sold, and on the other, you have the cold, hard reality of $500. The gap between those two things is so wide, the only way to cross it was with pure, unfiltered belief.
And this, right here, is where the foundation of the Phil Knight rule gets laid. It's the very first core principle. Vision and a powerful sense of self-belief are actual assets. They can be just as valuable, maybe even more so, than a pile of cash and a long list of contacts. Knight proved that if your story is good enough, if your belief is strong enough, you can literally will a company into existence. The vision has to come before the money. That's lesson number one.
But that crazy high-stakes bluff was just the very beginning. Now we have to get into the harsh, grinding reality that came next, because after the vision comes the work. And for Knight, that meant a full-on decade of desperation, a time that would forge the non-negotiable truths that define his company to this day. This part of the story wasn't about glamour. It was all about survival.
I want you to really picture this, because this image is everything. Forget the global icon we know today. For years, this was Blue Ribbon Sports. Phil Knight wasn't some CEO in a corner office. He was an accountant by day, crunching numbers for somebody else's company, and then a shoe salesman by night and on the weekends. He'd drive to track meets all over the Pacific Northwest, pop open the trunk of his Plymouth Valiant, and just try to get runners to try these new shoes from Japan. It was humble, it was grueling, and it was deeply uncertain work that built the brand one single pair at a time.
And look, this was not a quick startup story. This timeline shows you what a long, slow burn this really was. It took 2 full years from that bluff in '62 for the first shipment of shoes to even show up. It took until 1971, that's 9 years in, for their first big innovation, the waffle sole, to be invented. And a full decade went by before the name Nike was even a thing. This whole period wasn't about explosive growth. It was about waking up every single day and just choosing to keep going.
So, what do you learn from a decade of being on the edge of collapse? You learn what actually matters. And Knight figured out a huge truth. His vision alone was useless. His own talent, his own drive, it was totally powerless by itself. He needed 2 other things to survive: uncompromising loyalty from the people who believed in the vision with him, and relentless innovation in the product itself. Without those 2 pillars, the whole thing was just a dream.
And this brings us to the other half of the equation, Bill Bowerman, Knight's old track coach from the University of Oregon. This partnership is the perfect picture of those 2 pillars. Knight was the vision, he got the brand, the story, the aspiration, but Bowerman, he was the innovation. He was obsessed with performance, with technology, with making athletes faster. I mean, this is the guy who was literally pouring rubber into his wife's waffle iron to create a totally new kind of shoe sole. Their skills were the perfect match, and honestly, they were the only assets they had to make up for the fact that they were always broke. So out of that decade of just pure struggle, this really profound philosophy started to bubble up, and it would change everything. It wasn't something they wrote down in a mission statement, it was a truth they learned in the trenches, selling shoes one by one. It was this realization of what they were actually building. And this is the core of it all. This is the Phil Knight rule in its simplest, most powerful form. They figured out they weren't in the business of selling shoes. They were in the business of building a human relationship. They were connecting with people on a much deeper level, not just a transaction, but a shared belief system. The product was just the proof of that relationship, the physical evidence of a shared commitment to being great.
Okay, so let's officially define the rule. The Phil Knight rule is this. It's a systematic belief that real, long-term success is achieved by becoming a vehicle for your consumers' aspirations. It means you say no to short-term profits and quarterly thinking, and instead you build a deep, lasting emotional bond. Your brand's job isn't to sell something to the consumer, it's to reflect back at them the best version of themselves they hope they can become.
And this rule is built on 3 actionable pillars. First, the athlete's authenticity mandate. This means you speak directly to the struggle and the spirit of the most dedicated athletes, not just the casual weekend jogger. Their theory is, if you win the heart of the elite, everyone else follows. Second, the war on incrementalism. This is a relentless company-wide fight against small, safe improvements. You go for the game-changing innovations. And third, the strategic partnership filter. This means you prioritize deep, loyal, long-term relationships with athletes over shallow, short-term endorsement deals. It's about shared values, not just a paycheck.
Okay, so a philosophy is great, but how do you actually do it? How do you make it real every single day? Let's look at the practical systems Knight's team built to turn this vision into a daily reality, to make sure it was a core operating principle and not just some poster on the wall. Their number one system is what we call the Relentless Athlete Feedback Loop, and it is pure genius. Nike didn't use focus groups with casual joggers. No. They systematically embedded their designers and engineers with the most elite athletes and coaches on the planet. They demanded constant, high-volume, brutally honest feedback. They weren't asking, hey, do you like the color? They were asking, how can this shoe shave a 1/10 of a second off your time? They were solving real-world performance problems for the people pushing the absolute limits of human potential. And what do you get from a system like that? It guarantees authenticity. By solving the real problems of the world's best athletes, the brand earns its credibility from the top down. The innovation isn't some marketing gimmick. It's born from the actual blood, sweat, and tears of competition. This system makes sure the brand's voice is always the real deal, because it's not just talking to the athlete, it's talking as the athlete.
The second core system is all about communication. If the feedback loop is how they built the product, this is how they built the relationship. 3 simple words that became one of the most powerful brand statements in history. But it wasn't just a lucky accident. It was the result of a very specific communication discipline that perfectly captured their entire philosophy.
This is the just do it principle. It's a systematic way of using language. The whole goal is to use short, powerful, non-technical phrases that kind of bypass your rational brain and speak right to the emotional core of that competitive spirit. It doesn't talk about air cushioning technology or advanced polymer midsoles. It talks about overcoming doubt. It talks about taking that first step. It talks about that internal battle that we all fight. It connects on this primal human level. So when you put all these pieces together, the crazy bluff, the decade of struggle, the relationship philosophy, and these relentless systems, what you get is one of the most incredible transformations in business history. It's a journey that really deserves our respect, a story of turning an abstract belief into a tangible global force. And this is that journey. The incredible arc from a kind of shy, struggling accountant selling shoes from the trunk of his car to the founder of a company that is, for millions of people all over the world, the definitive global symbol of aspiration. It's really a testament to the power of a single, unwavering idea that he held on to through years and years of doubt and hardship.
So what's the big business lesson from his legacy? It's this: a factory can burn down, a patent can expire, a product can become obsolete, but a brand's visionary identity, the story, the emotion, the relationship, that is its ultimate non-depleting asset. It's the one thing that, if you take care of it, only gets more valuable over time. It's the core of what runs forever. So let's bring it all together. What is the final takeaway here for you? After understanding the bluff and the struggle and the systems, how can you apply the Phil Knight rule to build something that actually lasts, something that has real meaning?
The Phil Knight rule kind of turns the lesson right back on us. It forces us to ask the single most important question. What is the emotional core of your mission? Forget your product, forget your service, forget the what. Why do you do it? What fundamental human aspiration are you tapping into? Finding that answer, well, that's the first and most critical step to building something that can run forever.
Phil Knight built his empire on the truth that vision comes before capital. He proved that you don't need a massive budget to start, but you absolutely do need a massive belief. The Phil Knight rule shows us that real, lasting success isn't just about a good product or a clever marketing plan. It's built on a foundation of unshakable authenticity, a relentless war on tiny incremental innovation, and a deep, systematic commitment to emotional resonance. Those are the keys to building a brand that truly runs forever.
And in the end, after all the years of struggle and all the success, it all comes down to this single, unshakable idea. The essence of the Phil Knight rule, the secret to building a brand that lasts for generations, is to stop selling things. Stop selling shoes, stop selling software, stop selling services. Sell the aspiration, sell the feeling, sell the future version of your customer. Sell the aspiration, not the product.